Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Chapter 1391, Escaping. It was clear that the figures were a result of Han Li's abilities. Following that, black light flashed from the top of the giant's head. Another azure figure flickered into space and silently swept down. However, the giant already anticipated this, and he raised his head, releasing an emerald green beam of light from his head. The beam of light was as thick as a barrel and incredibly fast. As a result, the azure figure was unable to dodge and took the blow directly. A miserable scream sounded, followed by the fall of the azure figure. The giant sneered. But then, purple light shined from behind the figure, radiating brightly. Another silhouette inconceivable appeared. It waved its sleeve and released hundreds of golden specks of light. The newly appeared silhouette was Han Li. At such a close distance, even the giant immediately sensed the azure figure, but he was too late to stop it. He only heard the sharp patter of rain as the golden specks all struck the back of the giant. Enraged, the giant roared and a large green hand warped, arriving above Han Li's head. It overbearingly swept down. Han Li didn't panic. He unfolded his wings, wanting to flicker into a void. But then, the giant flicked two of his fingers with a cold snort. Their fingernails shot off in a tremble and disappeared in a blur. A moment later, two green streaks pierced through Han Li's wings at inconceivable speed. The sounds of thunder suddenly stopped. In great alarm, Han Li thought of another way to dodge, but it was too late. The giant's hand radiated with green light, and Han Li felt his surroundings grow tense as if it had turned to steel. Even with the immense power of his body, Han Li's movement slowed and he found it difficult to escape. In that delay, the giant green hand firmly grabbed him. The green giant's strength was absolutely no weaker than Han Li's. The giant sinisterly smiled at seeing his strike land true and revealed a violent expression. Green light surged through his hand as he exerted strength in his hand, intending on crushing Han Li alive. Han Li's face largely changed and he suddenly muttered an incantation. Azure light continued to surge through his body, glaring from the giant's hand. Then, his body seemed to become crushed as it turned into specks of light. The spirit light condensed in a nearby space, creating an azure talisman. Suddenly, it swept off into the distance. The giant looked at the display with surprise. 100 meters away, space fluctuated, followed by the flicker of Han Li's appearance. Although he was somewhat pale, he quickly collected himself and summoned the azure talisman into his hand. As he found himself in a moment of peril, he used the spirit form talisman's ability to substitute himself, thus allowing him to escape calamity and displace himself a distance away. After tempering the talisman for so many years, the spirit form talisman's abilities were far greater than before. At that moment, the giant spat out a beam of light at the silhouette, suddenly blurring as he approached the haggard Han Li. However, despite Han Li's ruined clothing and pale complexion, he turned to look at the giant with a sinister smile. Astonishingly, this was a different Han Li. The giant blinked and couldn't help but show his bewilderment. The Han Li before him immediately lit up with black light and suddenly shrunk into a black-haired monkey that was only a half-foot tall. It was the Weeping Soul Beast. When Han Li launched his previous attack, he secretly released the Weeping Soul Beast and had it take his form. The Silver Tear Wood Spirit had been too distracted to notice. With the protection of his illusions and the Weeping Soul Beast, he activated the High Zenith Invisibility Talisman and was able to quietly escape. Otherwise, with the Wood Spirit's immense spiritual sense, Han Li truly wouldn't have been able to fool the giant at such a close distance. The green giant faintly sensed that something was amiss and recalled the golden specks that Han Li released from his sleeve. Then, his expression sank as he swiped at his back. As one that was both person and tree, the Wood Spirit's body was extremely hardy, but his body senses was dull. Originally, he didn't believe that Han Li had a true method of harming him. But after he swiped his hand behind him, his eyes lit up as he discovered several inch-large golden beetles laying in his palm. "What is this?" The huge giant was startled, and soon he clenched his hand, but he unfolded it to discover the beetles were safe. His face drastically changed. When Han Li saw this from a distance, a fierce expression appeared on his face, and he gave the beetles a command with his spiritual sense. Suddenly, the giant's back flared with golden light as half-foot-long golden beetles began to strangely appear. They crawled over half of the giant's body and began wildly devouring it. Han Li watched with an emotionless expression, but his heart stirred. Although the gold-devouring beetles were said to have nothing they couldn't eat, that was only a record in the mortal realm. It was also recorded that wood and jade treasures could restrain them. The wood spirit tribe's half-human half-tree fusion was truly bizarre. Although their bodies resembled huge trees, he wasn't able to determine if they could be considered wood-type treasures. As the experiment went on, the giant soon let out a scream of agony. He slapped at his back with all his might, but the beetles continued to fiercely consume him. His near-indestructible crystalline body was now being easily torn apart by the beetles. With several hundred of these beetles gnawing away at the giant sensed the agony of being torn apart despite his dulled senses. Han Li was overjoyed. After he waved his sleeve to collect the weeping soul beast, his body lit up with azure light and he tore through the sky as an azure streak. Although the gold-devouring beetles were enough to deal with the giant, he couldn't deal with any of the giant's full-powered attacks. It'd be best if he put distance between them. Gold-devouring beetles. Fully matured gold-devouring beetles. You actually possessed such demonic insects. The giant's screams sounded as if it was having a most fearsome nightmare. Soon after, the sounds of repeated explosions sounded and green lights instantly filled most of the sky. Han Li didn't turn around and continued his escape with all his speed. In the blink of an eye, he was over the horizon. After several more flickers, he was long gone. A short moment later, a huge ball of light raised to the sky where the giant originally stood. It flew off past the sky in defeat. The faint silhouette of the badly damaged giant could be seen within. There was a cloud of golden insects closely pursuing it. With one trailing after another, they flew off a different direction from Han Li. Not long after, the golden beetle cloud buzzed as they circled and flew back. Not only did they return to their inch-large size, but beetles flew in unorganized disarray. Fortunately, the gold-devouring beetles weren't slow. They streaked past the air like bolts of lightning. 500 kilometers away in an area with scattered rocks, Han Li sat cross-legged with a pale complexion. He was doing his utmost to command the beetles back to him. He already consumed a truly significant portion of his spiritual sense. When the beetles finally returned to him, he eventually lost control of his body as it trembled and fell. At that same time, he put his hands behind his head and let out a painful groan. A quarter hour later, he was able to collect himself and sit back up. Using the beetles had been extremely dangerous, resulting in nearly all his spiritual sense being wasted. But even so, his spiritual sense only suffered minor damage. It seemed he wouldn't be able to use the beetles for pursuit to prevent excessive drain. Nevertheless, if he hadn't pursued the wood spirit with the gold-devouring beetles, the wood spirit would have discovered something amiss and wouldn't have given up so easily. Now, the silver-tier wood spirit suffered much damage from the gold-devouring beetles. Even if he was braver, he wouldn't dare to continue tangling with Han Li. Han Li stroked the spirit beast ring underneath his sleeves and let out a long breath. In a secret forest myriad kilometers away, the silver-tier wood spirit Mu Rui was sitting underneath a huge tree in his giant form. One of his arms and nearly half of his body had disappeared, but countless green specks of light flew out from the forest and wildly rushed into his body. The giant's missing body parts regrew at a visible speed. In the time it took to finish a cup of tea, the specks of light ceased and the giant's body was completely restored. But when he opened his eyes, they now appeared exceptionally dim. He held his hands in an incantation gesture and the giant's body spat out a hollow phantom. It then blurred and condensed into a pale green-skinned wood spirit. The giant then flashed with light and scattered away, turning into a huge tree. After the wood spirit returned to its original form, he glanced in the direction where he fought with Han Li. How very troublesome. This person possesses hundreds of gold-devouring beetles. If I were in peak condition, I could take the risk of killing him and have the beetles lose control. But after receiving 2 heavy injuries in succession, I suffered too much damage to my spirit tree. If I encounter those beetles again, I might truly die. It appears that I have no choice but to give up pursuit. After his expression wavered while in thought, he eventually shook his head and came to a decision. He turned into a ball of silver light and soared back in the direction of Black Leaves Forest. Not long after, Han Li restored a portion of his spiritual sense in another area. Not daring to stay in the area any longer, he suppressed his migraine and tore through the sky in an azure streak. He was heading in the direction of the southern skyline. 2 months later, Han Li arrived above a barren plateau. Soon after, he sought out a small earthy mountain in a remote place and burrowed into it with a yellow flash. In the heart of the mountain, he easily dug out a hidden room 30 meters wide and put it into order. Then, he drank several medicine pills and sat down cross-legged. A month later, Han Li opened his eyes, revealing their recovered spirit. His spirit, mind, and body made a full recovery. Chapter 1392. Third Refinement of the Thunderstorm Wings. Han Li didn't immediately stand up. Rather, he started to mutter to himself inside the hidden room. Not long after, he shook his sleeve and summoned an azure ring in his palm. It was the storage bracelet of the Black Phoenix clan's Xiao Hong. Although he suppressed her with the divine essence-fused mountain and spared her life, her storage bracelet was another story. It could be considered the price for sparing her life. As a demon cultivator and direct descendant of her clan, Han Li was very interested in what lay inside the storage bracelet. With a brief look at the bracelet with his spiritual sense, his face lit up in joy. It possessed many rare treasures. First off, demon beast materials occupied nearly half of the storage bracelet, with most of them rarely seen on the market. As a member of one of the 7 great demon clans, she should have a far easier time gathering materials compared to humans. He was also overjoyed to find 8 various colored top-grade spirit stones shining in the corner. Although this was the spirit realm, top-grade spirit stones weren't nearly as precious as one might imagine in the mortal realm. However, they weren't easily acquired either. Top-grade spirit stones were held in small number by high-grade cultivators, but never in large numbers. In particular, one of the white spirit stones was a rarely seen wind attribute spirit stone, much to Han Li's delight. Ever since he entered Deep Heaven City, he always wanted to acquire one. In addition to this, there were also magic tools and various ancient treasures that didn't catch Han Li's eyes. These items couldn't compare to his divine essence-fused mountain and his heaven void cauldron. Perhaps Xiao Hong didn't care much for these treasures also. Otherwise, she would have taken them out in battle. Additionally, there was a small collection of medicine bottles in the bracelet that piqued his interest. When he took them out in his hand, he began to identify them. Most of them were healing medicines, with a few of them being cultivation advancement medicine and rare pill refinement materials. One of the wooden boxes even contained a Zorizia dragon fruit. Han Li bluntly took that out and put it safely away. Then, he came across an odd silver bottle that was engraved with a black fire phoenix. A sparkling golden restriction talisman was sealing it. When Han Li saw this, his mind trembled. He tore the talisman off and opened its lid. Several pops later, 3 thumb-sized black medicine pills flew out from it and circled once in the air. They promptly turned into 3 nimble black flame phoenixes and flew off in different directions. Yee! Han Li yelped in surprise. Nevertheless, he reacted immediately. A grey mist of light flew out and swept up the 3 phoenixes. In the grey light, the phoenixes slowly revolved in the air. Light flashed and turned into 3 jet black medicine pills. The grey mist folded and withdrew, dropping the 3 phoenixes into Han Li's palm back in the form of medicine pills. Han Li picked up one of the pills with 2 fingers and brought it close to his eye. As medicine pills that can transform and fly, they were definitely valuable. As Han Li's expression turned grave, his mind was filled with various legends regarding medicine pills. Black flame pills. From the pills' provoking appearance, Han Li's eyes flickered and he immediately recognized them. His face lit up in ecstasy. In the entire world, only the Black Phoenix clan can refine these pills by using their personal flames. Even pill refinement masters aren't able to duplicate them. Refining these pills requires them to absorb the life flames of a Black Phoenix in addition to other mysterious materials. That is to say, even the Black Phoenix clan can't produce many of them. A clan member must be at deity transformation stage or above, and even then, they can only refine a single pill every 1,000 years. With high-grade Black Phoenix cultivators rarely seen, the Black Flame pills are as previous as one might imagine. The pills are prized among humans and demons. The most important reason is that they are an optimal supplementary medicine pill for breaking the bottleneck to the spatial tempering stage. Now that he had 3 of these pills, his odds of breaking through to spatial tempering increased by 20%. This left Han Li overjoyed. After some more careful examination and verifying the identity of the Black Flame pills, Han Li suppressed his excitement, returned the medicine pills to the bottle, and sealed it with talisman before carefully putting it away. The most important point of breaking through to spatial tempering was unifying the 5 elements in his body into one. After cultivating the divine essence-fused light, he didn't need to put much more consideration into that. And with the 3 Black Flame pills, he could search for more medicine and secret techniques to increase his odds of breaking through. His hopes of breaking through now greatly increased. But now, his main goal would be to quickly cultivate to late deity transformation stage. By using a large number of medicine pills, it'd only be a matter of time before he broke through the bottleneck of the mid-deity transformation stage. What was most troublesome would be that his original medicine pills would lose efficacy after he entered late deity transformation stage. He would need higher-grade pills in order to further progress. While there were medicine pills effective for late-stage cultivators, they weren't large in number. The most famous of them was the True Toad liquid. In fact, the reason why he risked taking this mission was largely related to the spirit toad it required. After some thought, Han Li suddenly recalled the mysterious guest that knocked on his door before he left Deep Heaven City and narrowed his eyes. If it truly went as smoothly as that person proposed, he could obtain much True Toad liquid. Although he couldn't use the green liquid to produce the medicine limitlessly, it would be enough for him to cultivate for some time. Having carefully remembered the promises of his visitors, Han Li felt there were no other problems and let out a long sigh before tossing the matter to the back of his mind. With a single hand, he swept his hand past the storage bracelet and took another extremely important gain. It was a sparkling rainbow feather. It was the rainbow phoenix feather acquired by the 2 women of the Yi clan. Han Li lightly stroked the feather and the air shined with rainbow light, nearly submerging the entire room with it. Han Li's heart stirred. It was worthy of its reputation as the life feather of a true spirit-grade heavenly phoenix. With only the feather, it released an aura above any mystical bird found in the mortal realm. Han Li stared at the feather and his vision flickered. He suddenly opened his mouth and spat out azure white lightning. A soft roll of thunder sounded. Sparks of light shifted several times, condensing into a pair of azure white wings that were several inches large. Han Li waved his hand at them and the miniature thunderstorm wings landed in his hand. He swept his gaze past it and frowned. There were a pair of slender holes in each of the wings. They were from when the giant wood spirit used its fingernails to pierce through the wings. Han Li's frown then faded away. He further examined the thunderstorm wings once through and concluded the damage would be easily fixed. According to what the soaring sky beast's incarnation said, the so-called thunderstorm wings were originally formed from Kuan-Peng feathers and couldn't truly become a spirit treasure, because he couldn't activate the wind attribute worldly laws contained in the Kuan-Peng feather. It also required a wind attribute top-grade spirit stone. That was the reason why he was originally looking for a top-grade wind-attributed spirit stone. Now that he obtained a heavenly phoenix feather, a true spirit material, his original plans had changed. He could add the feather into the thunderstorm wings. The heavenly phoenix feather was different from the Kuan-Peng feather. The heavenly laws it contained were awe-inspiring spatial abilities. If the feather's laws could be refined in the thunderstorm wings, its power would be as one imagined. The next time he came across a fearsome existence like the silver tear wood spirit, he would have no need to receive its attacks and could easily escape. Han Li fiddled with the wings and feather as he pondered. Fortunately, he already had the experience of refining the Kuan-Peng feather into the thunderstorm wings. Otherwise, he truly wouldn't have known what to do. Having come to that conclusion, Han Li took out 6 top-grade spirit stones from his storage bracelet. 5 of them represented each of the 5 elements, and he added a 6th, the wind-attributed spirit stone. With his current abilities, he no longer needed earth fire or the like. He opened his mouth and spat out a ball of silver flame. It roiled and gathered into a huge furnace roiling with silver flames. He tossed the thunderstorm wings into the furnace and pointed at the wind-attributed spirit stone. Winds rustled as the spirit stone and winds disappeared into the furnace. Han Li swept his sleeve at the ground, released an azure mist, producing a large pile of materials and bottles. They were the supplementary materials needed to refine the wings. Luckily, the matter of refining the wings had always been on his mind, so he gathered the needed ingredients over time. Han Li tossed a bottle of quicksilver-like liquid into the furnace and began to mutter as he struck the furnace with a chain of different spell seals. After 10 entire days passed, the room was filled with Han Li's hearty laughter. He stood at the heart of the room and held a pair of see-through crystalline wings. The wings shimmered with azure light and a rainbow mist covered it, but it was also clear as water. They could hardly be seen in Han Li's grasp, as if they were an illusion. Han Li already tested its might, and it had truly advanced to the level of a spirit treasure. It was marvelous far beyond what he imagined. This came as no surprise. Whether it be the Kuan Peng feather or the heavenly phoenix feather, so long as he could activate its abilities after refinement, refining it into a divine spirit treasure was no problem. Having transformed a treasure twice, Han Li created something with power that greatly satisfied him. Chapter 1393, Assembling Together. Han Li flung the translucent wings into the air, and he spat out a cloud of azure mist before absorbing both into his stomach. Following that, Han Li took out the damaged bamboo cloudswarm swords and began to temper them and slowly restore their spirituality. A year later, above a nameless mountain range in the wilderness, a faint azure light streaked across the sky. The light contained an insipid youth with his arms held behind his back. He was Han Li, who already departed from the hidden room several months before. When he mended his flying sword entirely, he departed from the heart of the mountain and immediately took the sky. Because he was alone, Han Li was extremely careful and thus spent half a year of flight in peace. As for the nameless mountain range he was flying above, it appeared unordinary. Regardless of their altitude, the trees appeared short as shrubbery. If he were to fly closer to the ground, he would also encounter a dense wave of moisture. The mountain range also had depressions that were filled with various sized lakes. Among them, the largest spanned to thousands of kilometers in width, while the smallest was only half a kilometer wide. Nevertheless, Han Li didn't dare to be careless as he flew past them. Foreign beings or all sorts of formidable ancient beasts could be lying in wait inside the water. Ever since he entered the mountains, he had already killed a dozen strange beasts that took the initiative to attack him. Among them included a huge eel from one of the lakes. It was nearly at deity transformation stage and had ferocious water-attributed abilities. It was rather exhausting to deal with. Half a month later, the mountain features began to change and he came across 2 perfectly straight mountains that were 3 kilometers tall. When Han Li caught sight of the mountains, Han Li's eyes lit up with joy. With regard to their size, they weren't particularly odd, but one of them was silver white. Most of the mountain was covered in exceptionally cold crystalline snow. The other mountain was sparkling purple and had maple-like trees growing all over it. The leaves on these trees shined with an odd purple light. The mountains were separated by over 5 kilometers, but apart from the silver snow and the purple trees, the mountains appeared almost entirely the same. Since the 2 mountains are here, it seems they were telling the truth. Han Li muttered. Soon, his light flashed and he made his way to the mountain of snow. When he drew close, he encountered raging winds that carried an incisive, bone-chilling cold. His expression stirred, but a layer of azure light appeared from his body and he continued forward unhindered. But before he entered the mountain, 2 streaks of light shot out from the area covered most densely in snow. With several flashes, they arrived 100 meters away from Han Li. Han Li then dismissed his flight light and revealed his body. So it was fellow Day Oist Han. I knew that with your abilities, you'd make it out of a trifling mission just fine. The lights in front of Han Li vanished to reveal two men. One of them recognized Han Li and spoke with a smile. The person's complexion was pale and he appeared to be 60 years of age. When Han Li first entered Deep Heaven City, he met Old Man Liu from Spirit Flight Hall. As for the person to his side, he appeared to be a sickly scholar, but he also wore a kind expression. So it was Brother Liu and Brother Ouyang. Didn't you two come here earlier than me? It seems your missions were finished smoothly. Han Li chuckled, refraining from mentioning his brush with death with the Wood Tribe. Old Man Liu shook his head and he said, "How could our mission compare with yours? I simply followed a few golden guards as they wiped out a few small strongholds held by foreign races. So long as I was a bit careful, I wasn't in any danger." Han Li smiled and asked, "Apart from your two, have any others come?" Old Man Liu flashed a beaming smile and said, "Of course. Our journey requires many people. Although we predicted that about half of our numbers wouldn't be able to arrive, just about everyone we needed has arrived. Let me guide you. Then I'll have to trouble you." Han Li saluted him. Han Li followed the two and streaked towards the icy mountain. After a short journey, the old man in the lead took out a jade badge and held it out in the air in front of him. A wave of white light flew out from the badge and revealed a field of white lotuses that flashed with light. Old Man Liu commanded the light and entered one of the white lotuses, which soon flashed before disappearing. Han Li blinked. He and the scholar soon followed. There was a layer of illusion formations that were placed there. It was quite mysterious since he hadn't been able to see it. In that case, if an ordinary ancient beast arrived nearby, it wouldn't discover anything odd about the mountain. The three flickered several times with light as they flew above the mountaintop and dropped down in front of an ice pavilion. There was a group of various styled ice buildings nearby. There was also a man and two women that were keeping watch of the pavilion. When they saw the three arrive, their sights focused on Han Li. The man possessed a large stature and wore grey robes. His full beard gave him a bold appearance. One of the women appeared over 40 years old, wore azure robes, and had an ordinary appearance. The other woman appeared young, wore green robes, and wore a veil. When Han Li saw the veiled woman, he yelped, "Fairy Ying, I didn't think that you would take the invitation to. What a coincidence." Han Li called out to her in surprise. The veiled woman replied with a sweet smile, "I knew you'd be here. I can be considered a founding member." She was Fairy Ying who had invited Han Li to team up when he last attended a meeting for ascended cultivators. A founding member? That is truly outside my expectations. Han Li chuckled. When Han Li was invited to join the group, Fairy Yin wasn't among those who met him, but he still found them to be trustworthy. As for the people who initiated this gathering, Han Li didn't care much about that. Han Li flickered his gaze and swept his eyes past the other two. The two appeared familiar as if he had seen them before at the meeting for ascended cultivators. However, he didn't seem to have talked to them before. The lowest cultivation the three possessed was at mid-deity transformation stage. The older woman in particular was a late deity transformation cultivator. Thus, Han Li saluted them. The large man and the older woman promptly returned his salute, not daring to neglect him. The veiled woman soon invited Han Li to take a seat in the pavilion. After some thought, Han Li shook his head and said, "I've received a few wounds on my mission, and I've spent some magic power flying without rest. I'll need to recover. If I remember correctly, there is still a month before the determination meeting time." Old Man Liu twirled his beard and spoke with a friendly face. He, we've overlooked that. Please take a rest. We'll talk to you later. The rooms on the very left don't have anyone in them. Go ahead and choose one. Of course, if you are dissatisfied, you can construct your own. Then I'll go ahead. Han Li faintly smiled and bid them a few words of farewell. He then walked to one of the ice rooms and disappeared inside with a few flickers. As the few cultivators looked at Han Li's back, silence filled the air. The woman slightly frowned and slowly asked, "Is Brother Han hurried to rest because his injuries are severe?" "It shouldn't be. His complexion is fine. It's probably just that he's low on magic power." The large grey-robed man shook his head. Fairy Yin indifferently said, "That might not be the case. If Han Li possesses exceptional concealment techniques, we wouldn't be able to see anything odd. Nevertheless, since he's here on schedule, he's already demonstrated that his abilities are unordinary. Even if he is somewhat ill, I believe that it won't affect our plans." Didn't fellow Daoist Yuan and Master Jing Yuan also head straight to their rooms upon arriving? She clearly had quite a bit of confidence in Han Li. The sickly scholar smiled and said, "Your words make sense. Although fellow Daoist Han is only a mid-deity transformation cultivator, according to my information, his abilities are among our top 3. The older woman was stunned and doubtfully said, "Your words aren't an exaggeration, are they? Fellow Daoist Han is only a mid-deity transformation cultivator. Are you sure?" The veiled woman leisurely explained, "Older Sister Zhao has remained in diligent cultivation over these past few years in Deep Heaven City and hasn't taken part in our meetings. It is no surprise you don't know of Brother Han. Fellow Daoist Han had killed many similar grade foreign beings, and he also captured many of them alive. He is quite famous among the newly ascended cultivators in the city. One of his abilities in particular is incredibly effective against Shadow Tribe beings. This was primarily one of the reasons we went through such great lengths to invite him. Fellow Daoist Ying means that he will be effective in dealing with those shadow bug beasts." The older woman realized. Old man Liu added, "That's right. Otherwise, they will be troublesome to deal with. If we consume that much magic power before we encounter our true prey, that would be awful." The older woman nodded and said nothing else. As for the others, they took a seat and briefly chatted. When Han Li entered the ice room, he sat cross-legged and closed his eyes. Chapter 1394, Scheming for True Toads. About 2 weeks later, a clear and long shriek sounded from the outside. Although it wasn't loud, it roused Han Li and the others that were resting. Han Li's brow moved and he opened his eyes. He blinked and tilted his head in thought. Then he stood up and walked out of the ice building. There was a spacious area in front of the ice building, but at an unknown time, it turned into an icy hall that was 300 meters long. It was supported by many huge pillars of ice. Although they were exceptionally crude, it sparkled under the sunlight and gave it an imposing presence. Inside the hall, there was a 10-meter-tall platform where a man and a woman stood. The man had a head of silver hair and a handsome young face. As for the woman, she wore her hair in a coil and had a well-rounded body, adding to her exceptional beauty. Despite her bare, frail, and flawless limbs, she didn't seem to mind the cold. The two were at the spatial tempering stage. The man in particular was at mid-stage. The long whistle came from the silver-haired man. 5 people were standing below the platform. Fairy Ying and Old Man Liu stood among them. When the whistle sounded, Han Li and the others came out from their buildings. In the blink of an eye, over 20 cultivators appeared on the mountain. The cultivators were all at the deity transformation stage at the very least. They walked to the hall with various expressions. Han Li wore a calm expression as he followed them inside. When the group entered, many people immediately said, "We pay our respects to Senior Zhu and Senior Qing. These 2 seniors have also come. It is good to see you again." Han Li soon found an empty spot and stood there unmoving. The 2 that originally visited and invited him were the pair of famous Golden Guards, the woman and man on stage. Although he only spoke to them once, he had heard much about them. If they weren't also ascended cultivators, Han Li didn't know if he would have agreed to this meeting, no matter what rewards were promised. Senior Zhu's long whistle had come to a stop and he smiled in response to everyone's greeting. Then he loudly said, "It appears everyone has come. Please have a seat. Let's have a proper discussion on how we'll clean up the nest of blue-eyed true toads." When he finished speaking, the woman at his side immediately released a spell seal on the floor. Suddenly, the ice hall lit up with white light and rows of exquisite jade chairs appeared as a result of simple spell formations. When the cultivators saw this, they took a seat. The 2 spatial tempering cultivators on stage also sat down. The silver-haired man swept his gaze to both sides and smiled. It appears that the number of cultivators that arrived was what we expected. When we invited you, we assumed 40% would be able to make it. As for the others, they couldn't make it for a myriad of reasons. But even so, we will have to concentrate our efforts in exterminating the blue-eyed true toad next. When the time comes, we will all take what we need. You will divide the true toad spirit blood among yourselves, while we will take the 1,000 heart flowers that the beasts are guarding. It is as we had mentioned before. Are there any objections? Of course, the division of true toad spirit blood will be in accordance to what you contribute. It won't be evenly split. I hope that you will stifle your thoughts about having a free ride. With that said, a huge pressure faintly emitted from his body and his face turned stern. The other cultivators in the room remained standing and added nothing else. Good, since you understand, let's discuss the operation's concrete steps. The group of true toads were discovered by Fairy Ying. Let's have her explain. The youth smiled and turned to the veiled woman. Senior Zhu, your wish is my command. Fairy Ying smiled and she gracefully stood up. She swept her gaze past the other cultivators and said, I won't speak of how I discovered the true toad nest, but I can tell you that there are nearly 10 toads. The 2 fully mature toads are around the level of mid-spatial tempering. The other toads will be at nascent soul strength. The toads have always hidden in the depths of their nest and rarely head out. If we wish to attack their nest, it will become very difficult. After all, it will be difficult for us to fight them in that environment. With that said, the woman briefly paused and continued, if it was just that, there would be no need to invite you all here. The crucial point is that there are 2 types of ferocious beasts living nearby. One of them is the black blood ants, with the other being a shadow insect beast. The 2 insects might not be anything alone, but they live together in a group over 100. If we want to deal with the toads, we'll need to deal with these insects first. Black blood ants. Shadow insect beasts. When they heard the masked woman, most of the cultivators began to whisper. There were even a few that didn't dare to discuss the topic with their neighbors. The 2 insects were actually quite infamous. If the insects were 3, they would pose a large threat even against spatial tempering cultivators. After she finished speaking, the veiled woman nodded to the silver-haired youth and sat back down. Senior Zhu calmly said, there is no need to be nervous. Since we've invited you here, we already have a method to deal with them. We only need you to assist us with vigor. An old man with a bamboo hat stood up and bowed, saying, Senior Zhu, it's not that we don't trust you, but the matter appears quite dangerous. Could Senior explain his plan? The old man was one of the few late deity transformation cultivators. So it was fellow Daoist. Please sit back down. Even if you didn't mention it, I still would have explained. Senior Zhu smiled nonchalantly. The old man didn't speak any further and sat down with a salute. It's quite simple, the 2 insects may be troublesome, but we've purchased sandalwood crane incense. It has an immensely powerful attractive allure to the black blood ants. So long as we light it from a distance, we can easily attract them to the surface and exterminate them. On the contrary, the shadow insects are troublesome to deal with. However, we've borrowed a set of profound heavenly lightning flags. With 8 of you using this treasure, we can form a ring of lightning and restrain the insects. Apart from that, we also invited fellow Daoist Han and Fairy Xiao, who both have techniques that will be effective against the insects. With you 2 assisting the lightning formation, it should be safe. As for the remaining few, they will join with me and my wife in exterminating the true toads. How do you feel about this? Senior Zhu's voice wasn't loud, but it was easily heard. When Han Li heard Senior Zhu mention his own name, his expression stirred and he swept his gaze past the hall, finding that many were looking in his direction. There was also a woman wearing silver-white robes that appeared in her 20s. She possessed a dainty appearance and looked at Han Li with a warm smile. Han Li unconsciously returned the smile and curiously thought, could it be she is Fairy Xiao? She also cultivates an ability that can restrain the shadow insects. Follow that, other cultivators would occasionally ask a question. Fairy Zhu answered all of the questions with a friendly tone, satisfying all the cultivators present. However, Han Li took notice that the beautiful woman at his side rarely said a word from the very start. She merely stood there with a smile. Han Li found this odd. He recalled that when they invited him to this meeting, only the handsome youth seemed to speak. She hadn't spoken at all. Could it be that the woman is a high-ranking Buddhist and practices that strange technique that requires a vow of silence? Otherwise, if she were deaf or mute, how would she be able to cultivate to this stage? Han Li inwardly pondered. After 2 hours passed, there were no other questions and Senior Zhu began to divide them. It stood to mention that apart from Han Li and Fairy Xiao, there were actually many cultivators among them that practiced a rare lightning technique, allowing them to use the profound heavenly lightning flags and form a ring lightning formation. All of those present were ascended cultivators or the descendants of ascended cultivators. None of them had been born naturalized with this world. Therefore, although their numbers were many, they didn't care much about how they were divided. When they were all given an assignment, Senior Zhu didn't have an intention of delay and promptly gave a command, ordering the 20-some people to depart. They all flew west. After 3 entire days of flight, the party eventually arrived in front of a huge lake. With a single glance, they saw a dense and salty mist from the lake, giving it a mysterious presence. Many of the cultivators couldn't help but frown at the sight. Normally, most cultivators were unwilling to enter strange areas in the wilderness like this one, as it was unknown what lurked in the mist and the lake. If they were ambushed, it would be a brush with death. Without need for a warning, everyone slowed their speed and stopped in front of the mist. Chapter 1395, Sandalwood Crane Incense and Black Blood Ants. The silver-haired spatial tempering youth, Senior Zhu, loudly announced from the front, "Fellow Taoists, be careful. There is an unknown demon bird in the mist, but fortunately, they aren't very strong. So long as you are careful of the acid they spit, it shouldn't be fine. As for the mist itself, let me and my wife deal with it." Afterwards, the others waited as the silver-haired youth opened his mouth and spat out a long white jade bottle. It spun in the air and had its mouth pointed at the white mist. The youth formed a hand gesture with both his hands and muttered an incantation, causing the jade bottle to brightly light up. A muffled crackle sounded, followed by the bottle releasing an azure wind. When the wind flew out, it only carried a faint azure light, but after it traveled 10 meters, it blew into a raging gale. Then in the blink of an eye, it turned into a violent tornado. The mist on the surface of the lake violently roiled as it split apart. A clear path opened in the mist. "We go." With Senior Zhu's command, he and his wife took the initiative to first fly through the path. The jade bottle he earlier released began to circle above his head and continued to release violent gales. When the others saw this, they felt a sense of relief and followed after them. As Senior Zhu had mentioned, after they entered 5 kilometers in, meter-long white birds with flat beaks and dark green claws began to appear from the surrounding mist. The birds were clearly targeting the cultivators. As soon as they emerged from the mist, they opened their mouths and released black ice arrows. With several shouts, the cultivators released their magic treasures, summoning formations of swords or several ancient shields. When the black ice arrows struck, they immediately turned into black smoke. It left dense and numerous holes in the treasures where they struck. The masters of the magic treasure revealed shock when they saw this. One of them immediately shouted, "Quickly kill them. Their acid can corrode our treasures." The others felt their hearts tremble when they heard this and immediately displayed their various techniques. Streaks of swift light and waves of mist moved in the direction of the demon birds. Under the wave of attacks, the demon birds turned into balls of gore and blood, instantly dying in their entirety. When the others saw this, they felt relief. The birds had been truly weak. A quarter-hour later, several strange cries sounded from the mist. Suddenly, another flock of white birds flew out from the mist and pelted the cultivators with black ice arrows. Startled, the cultivators flusteredly released their treasures and blocked the attacks before exterminating the birds once more. When the last of the birds turned into a bloody pulp, many bird silhouettes began to appear from the mist. The cultivators became restless when they saw this, and many of them wore expressions of unease. Han Li frowned and he swept his spiritual sense through the mist. Bird cries began to sound out from the mist surrounding them from every direction, including from above and below them. There were too many to keep track of. Although Han Li had encountered many dangers, even this caused him to feel a chill on his back. Senior Zhu's calm voice sounded from the front, "Everyone, don't be scared. These birds are only launching probing attacks on us. When they see that a dozen waves of their attacks are ineffective, they will scatter." When the others heard this, they began to activate their treasures and slaughtered any of the white birds that came to attack them. 13 waves of the birds attacked them in succession. Eventually, long sharp cries sounded from the flocking birds and they scattered, withdrawing from the mist around them. When the cultivators saw this, they felt relief and seized the opportunity to head forward. Half a day later, the mist cleared around them. Their surroundings lit up and they saw a huge mountain at the center of the lake. It was overwhelmingly large and seemed to reach out from the bottom of the lake. The portion of the mountain they could see was filled with green stone. Apart from the moss that grew on top of them, there were no other plants. After the group came to a stop, Senior Zhu clicked his tongue and said, "It is here. We have to thank Fairy Ying and her comrades in finding this place." The veiled woman chuckled and said, "We found this mountain unintentionally as we were pursuing a beast. This was only a fortunate encounter." Senior Zhu laughed and spoke with excited eyes. "In truth, if one isn't lucky, it would be difficult to find this secret land. Nevertheless, we came across a group of true toads. If it were on the outside, it would have been likely found by others. Let us start." The other cultivators nodded with a smile. The true toad nest is located in a natural underground cave at the bottom of the mountain. We'll act as we originally planned. We'll first attract the black blood ants and kill them. Everyone, be careful. Although the ants are a grade 8 demon beast, they are innately capable of breaking our defensive shields and light. Furthermore, they are incredibly venomous. If they bite us, immediately swallow an antidote or your life will be forfeit. All right, everyone prepare yourselves. I will light the sandalwood crane incense. Following his quick warning, Senior Zhu flipped his hand and suddenly produced a palm-sized incense burner. He struck a half-foot-long stick of green incense. He flung the incense burner up where it slowly revolved in midair. Senior Zhu raised his hand and flicked his finger, igniting the incense with a flash of red light. The green incense stick then released a trail of azure smoke. When Han Li looked at the incense burner, an odd expression appeared on his face. The sandalwood crane incense looked unremarkable and it didn't have much of a scent either. Was it truly effective against the black blood ants? Han Li worriedly mused. At that moment, the cultivators began to separate and conceal themselves. Han Li was among them, flying 300 meters up. Just as he was about to cast a technique, a white streak flickered and a slender silhouette appeared by his side. Han Li was stunned and looked at the silhouette. She was the dainty woman, Fairy Xiao. The woman was also surprised Han Li chose the same location. She soon smiled and politely said, "Brother Han, I have 100 bewildering lights flag. It is rather marvelous at concealing a location. How about I use it to hide us both?" In that case, I'll have to trouble you," Han Li courteously replied. "It is only a slight effort. Brother Han is being too formal." She faintly smiled and raised her hand, producing a small snow-white flag. It then spun a circle above them. The woman struck the flag with a spell seal and it blurred, suddenly producing a white mist. It brilliantly shined, covering them in a mist in the blink of an eye. A moment later, the mist vanished alongside Han Li and Lady Xiao. Han Li stood in his original location and raised his hand. Even with his bright sight spirit eyes, he still wasn't able to see it. With a tone of surprise, Han Li praised, "Your treasure is truly marvelous. It is much more powerful than ordinary concealment treasures." Fellow Daoist Han must be joking. This 100 bewildering lights flag may be truly powerful in invisibility, but it isn't capable of concealment from spiritual sense. It is only useful against creatures with weak spiritual sense like these insect beasts. To his surprise, Han Li swept his spiritual sense past the woman and immediately verified her words to be true. He lamented, feeling it was a pity. As his bright sight spirit eyes couldn't see through the invisibility, it would be a formidable treasure if it could also hide from spiritual sense. At that moment, the others also hid and withdrew their aura. A moment later, Apart from the small incense burner floating in the air, there was nothing else in sight. The sandalwood crane incense was truly effective. In only the time it took to finish a meal, buzzing sounds came from the direction of the mountain. At an unknown cave at the center of the mountain, a group of large winged ants flew in their direction. The ants were each about 1/2 a foot long and were fanged. There was also a pair of green wings on their back. It appeared as if they were flying birds. They were truly startling. It was obvious the ants were heading for the incense burner. Eventually, they made their way from the mountain to the incense and were completely surrounded by the cultivators. Suddenly, the nearby space around the burner fluctuated. Senior Zhu and the beautiful woman appeared at nearly the same time, and he shouted, "Attack!" Lights lit up in every direction, and soon, several tens of treasures appeared, turning into mists of light as they swept at the ant swarm. Large-scale attacks such as fireballs and lightning struck as well. From the fierce barrage, it appeared the cultivators wanted to end the ant swarm in a single strike. With multiple huge explosions, the ants were submerged in rainbow light. Soon, waves of heat and cold swept out from the center of the barrage, forming an immense storm at the center of the explosions. The pressure of the winds even blew the cultivators a few steps back. When the light and winds faded, all the ants disappeared, leaving not even a trace of ash behind.